So it's interesting to start thinking of globalization as a big idea, essentially, as a big idea that lacks definition. And as a result of that, if it doesn't have a definition, it can fit a whole lot of ideas in it, kind of the same way the Matrix did. Ideas have retained some of the properties of organisms, Monod wrote. Like them, they tend to perpetuate their structure and to breathe. They can too can fuse, recombine, segregate their content. Indeed, they too can evolve, and in this evolution, selection must surely play an important role. Monod is the 1965 Nobel Prize winner to figure out the role of messenger RNA in genetic information. Kind of one of the reasons why we have COVID vaccines today, a few years earlier. And he thought of the world as a big, massive, lively uh, form or a kingdom, if you will, a kingdom that is running on ideas that exist outside and through the biosphere. And in this idea here, he's pointing out too the ideas that have a life of their own, kind of like other organisms get a life of their own, something that eventually inspired Richard Dawkins to talk about memes. Examples of memes, according to Dawkins, are tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes, fashions, ways of making pots or of building arches, just as genes propagate themselves in the gene pool by leaping from body to body via sperms or eggs, so memes propagate themselves in the meme pool by leaping from brain to brain via a process which, in the broad sense, can be called imitation. If a scientist hears or reads about a good idea, he passes it on to his colleagues and students. He mentions it in his articles and his lectures. If the idea catches on, it can be said to propagate itself, spreading from brain to brain. As my colleague N.K. Humphrey neatly summed up in an earlier draft of this chapter, memes should be regarded as living structures, not just metaphorically, but technically. When you plant a fertile meme in my mind, you literally parasitize my brain, turning it into a vehicle for the meme's propagation in just the way that a virus may parasitize the genetic mechanism of a host cell. And this isn't a way of talking. The meme for, say, belief in life after death is actually realized physically millions of times over as a structure in the nervous system of individual men the world over. Now, the principles of natural selection, of variation, of heredity, of fitness, all of those things are taken into account, of course, through Dawkins. And the last paragraph here is a note of Dawkins's pretty well documented atheism. Of course, the idea here would be that people who believe life after death are quote unquote parasitized by religion, or they have been caught into the meme of religion by believing in an idea that doesn't have much standing in terms of biology, but has a whole lot of cultural and kind of imaginary ways to survive. And so, if we think of memes as those more or less big or smaller ideas and what those things represent and what those things fulfill for us, the memes of the global world allow us to relate to very basic concepts in a variety of ways because they do not have much of a content that we can identify as this or that, as a political, as a cultural, as even an economic value. Seeing a cat playing a keyboard is something that will allow everyone and anyone to agree on, well, something, perhaps the fact that a cat could play a keyboard. That being said, the most common memes in which we start to think, and especially the ones that tend to be the best, the most impactful in the short term, are those that actually have some kind of cultural content, perhaps a cultural content that we can relate to a specific moment in time or in place. This particular meme here, you may or may not understand depending on your age, depending on your cultural values, depending on how you feel about US politics. Mitt Romney, in his 2012 campaign, proposed to cancel Sesame Street. And the result of that was a campaign to save Big Bird as as illustrated in this particular meme, using the imagery from Barack Obama's campaign, using the face of Big Bird from Sesame Street, using the larger U.S. political system as a basis, and whether or not this particular meme, as it's shown here, has any kind of significance today, is more a testament to the way that U.S. politics works than really the quality of the meme itself. But if people are able to understand things, to relate to things, maybe to process them and to develop some kind of affection, in other words, if you see this meme of Big Bird and you want to save Big Bird as a result of that, regardless of whether or not you understand the US political context, you can see this funny bird and you might want to save it, then the meme is kind of achieving its goal here of uniting people around a cause of, something cute and fun. Now, this leads us to a much larger idea that is transcribed in the reading for this week that has to do with games. Because very early on, people who were interested in marketing, as was the context of Monday's conversation, people who were interested in marketing realized that the more ways you can engage people, the more ways you can get people to interact with media, including the marketing media, the more efficient that media becomes. This article from 1996 concerns what they called at the time computer mediated environments, CME. In summary, the new medium as market represented by the hypermedia CME, of which the World Wide Web on the internet currently stands as the preeminent prototype, offers a working example of a many-to-many communication model in which the consumer is an active participant in an interactive exercise to multiple feedback loops and highly immediate communication. As such, it offers dynamic potential for growth and development, as well as a virtual revolution in both the way marketing academics and practitioners alike approach the problem of effective consumer-oriented marketing in emerging media environments. So, being able to engage people in a variety of ways, being able to hearken to cultural moments, being able to capture kind of memories from people, being able to provide a um, multiple, maybe a varied way to engage with marketing media is or was even as early as the 90s seen as an effective way to sell stuff. Sell, for example, political campaigns. And Mitt Romney did not win his particular campaign, whether or not those memes working against him actually were effective, but also whether it comes to the larger idea of people existing in an entire universe altogether. This is a screenshot from the video game Witcher 3, which provides a very open world in which people can just travel around and experience, well, things, whatever it is that they want. If they want to experiment flowers, they can do that. If you want to experience cities and villages, they can do that. If they want to experience horseback riding, they can do that. If they want to experience fighting with gigantic demons, they could also do that as well. But the idea here of video games providing a very rich experience to their users is something that has not gone unnoticed in the past 10 years or so. And this is especially due to the fact that we now have enormous amounts of data that can be carried over very large amounts of time and space to create procedurally these types of environments, which a few years ago would have been almost unthinkable. And still to this day, you need a very high-end machine to be able to experience this fully. But you have access to entire worlds altogether at the reach of your hand. And these are working by, again, stimulating a sensory response from people where they can do feelings things that they like, where they can view things that they like, where they can feel things that they like, for example with controllers that are becoming more and more interactive or have more and more of that feedback that was mentioned in the last article. And now, especially with the new conversations about kind of these full body realities or the augmented or virtual reality, the amount of data that is being carried over into literally your face, is certainly a way in which these conversations are going to uh, become more and more based around the idea of games. And that itself is something that has been observed as called the gamification of, well, business, but about everything. The reading that we have for this week talks about the game is not the experience, the game enables the experience. It is not the experience. In a world as large as that of Fallout 3, different games, but same idea, which allows for an experience framed in terms of wondering and lonesomeness, story provides, if nothing else, badly needed direction and purpose. Unless some narrative game comes along that radically changes gamer expectations, stories with or without super mutants will continue to be what many games will use to harness their uniquely extravagant brand of fictional absorption. And fictional absorption here works for fighting demons, of course, but it also works for literally anything that you feel like you need. Perhaps any kind of sensory reflection that you get from watching the Matrix movies, or that you get from drinking coffee at Starbucks, for example. Drinking coffee at Starbucks allows you to gain points that give you levels, just like you would level up in video games. And those levels give you perks, give you advantages, give you feedback that make you more likely to return to Starbucks, in addition to the enjoyment of coffee and the taste of the coffee itself, the sugar that you get from it, all of the reactions that I don't drink coffee. I don't know what I'm talking about here. But whatever it is that people drink coffee for, well, that's the experience, and that's the sensory reaction to be harnessed and gamified by the experience of going to Starbucks. Now, it's kind of interesting to see how things like the so-called metaverse is going to bring in this idea of gaming into essentially everyday life. At least this is how they picture it in a way. This idea of people meeting in a virtual space where they can see these avatars of themselves is essentially how games work, except the game here is the boring everyday life, the things that it otherwise particularly dulling to the senses, and it is not clear how such a concept could work, but there are enormous amounts of money, enormous amounts of power being invested currently to make these things work. Which leads us to another conversation that actually happened this week in the message board of Black Mirror. Black Mirror is a Netflix, I think, I mean, started although another place, not Netflix, but now it's on Netflix. Anyway, I'm not advertising any particular platform. It's a TV show that is on the streaming platform that I may or may not have just quoted, and which kind of shows the dangers of technology, and especially technology being used in more or less gratuitous ways, as well as being used for somebody else's profit. So ways that are covertly used as well as overtly used. The Black Mirror itself is a piece of technology that existed in the 19th century, described here in the Encyclopedic Dictionary of Photography. A piece of black glass with an optical plane surface and highly polished, also known as the Claude Lorraine mirror. It is recommended for photographing clouds by reflection. A piece of glass of plate glass coated at the back with a black varnish can also be used if care be taken to avoid a secondary image formed by the reflection of the surface of the glass. A black mirror is also useful for viewing landscapes to get a better idea of the ultimate results in the photographs of scenery seen as monochrome images. The idea of the black mirror is a piece of technology that allows you to see what art would, could, might look like if you were to enjoy the art itself. And the richer people of Europe back in the 19th century would travel around Europe using black mirrors to enjoy the scenery as they had seen it in paintings, as opposed to seeing it in real life, because the real life vision of it looked a bit dull, looked a bit not quite sensorily acceptable, as opposed to the reflection they could see in the black mirror. And so the TV show comes from this idea of creating a bit of technology that allows you to experience society in a way that is less dull than the society itself, as it happens here. And of course, you could expand that to the idea of memes just as much as a meme allows you to experience a dull, perhaps offensive sometimes view of reality that you might not want to deal with, but that you can enjoy through the lighthearted approach of a meme. That's not to say that this is all those memes are for, and of course, different people have different ideas about what is a sensory reward and what is not. You could make memes, for example, that refer to worlds that are completely alien to yourself, such as this one. You may or may not understand what this meme says or does or what it's supposed to achieve, but there are people in the world who decided that this meme was important to make and actually started to circulate it on social media. It says a meme for a world that I am not going to define for you. I'm going to let you figure it out. And of course, there are other languages out there. This particular meme here about culture, I was looking for memes about culture and I found this one, which is not in my language and therefore probably not very valuable to most people who are reading this. Although, eventually, people who see this image might actually come up and speak Russian and realize what this meme means. And in fact, this meme doesn't have much to do with culture. It is a critique of culture. The person on the right is Dmitry Anteo, a Russian fascist who was not super happy with the way that Western culture, especially, hence the name here, culture, that is the dominant, understood to be as the dominant culture that is the American Western culture, compared to his own version of what he believes is valuable in society. And of course, that is his own view of what is valuable, his own view of what is sensorily appreciated, as opposed to what many other people outside of that would enjoy. So there is quite a bit of work that can be done here, and especially if we are thinking in terms of gaming a system, that the different points in which people are going to hook on to an idea, go hook on to an organism, hook on to the world around themselves, are going to be very varied. And as a result of that, globalization is going to have to find those things that are possible to unite a whole lot of people across the world, as opposed to those things that are probably not, such as the Russian far right. That being said, of course, today, the most common ways in which people are going to experience memes are those that have a very wide appeal, those things that are satisfying to the most basic views of your daily life, and those that are not going to require you to think too much or to learn a new language or even to understand another profession in order to make sense out of them. The most basic ideas, the biggest ideas remain the most accessible ones, but it doesn't mean that this is ever going to be a global phenomenon, let alone something that could perhaps allow everyone to walk in the same direction.